Hello, hello! Sonic the Hedgehog 3 came out recently, I watched it, and we're going to talk about that today. You might be wondering, why Sonic? Well, for one, I seem to have a lot of Sonic fans in my fan base for some reason. Also, this is worth discussing, and you will see why in a bit. So I drew a Sonic image in anticipation of the digital release that happened on the 21st. And I did so in anticipation that either this was going to be a train wreck or it was going to be weirdly fun. It was indeed one of those things. Now, I usually do a no-spoiler review video for these kinds of things, but there wouldn't be much to talk about otherwise, other than just the normal things that I usually talk about with Sonic. Oh, this thing sure is hard to draw. Their heads are all circles, their bodies are peanuts. You know, just standard Play-Go gripes things. So here is first my non-spoiler review. I really enjoyed 3. I think we have finally moved out of the era of worrying about adapting games for general audiences. For example, the Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo Mario-type movies feel like they're in the very, very distant past. Now, to be fair, I'm absolutely sure we're going to be still getting terrible adaptations. That's not what I'm saying. After all, one of my most recent videos was doing a tier list for Secret Level, which is a video game series of Love, Death, and Robot-style shorts, and most of those were terrible. And they are usually terrible because there is no passion or authenticity behind them. It's just an advertisement for something else, effectively. That sort of thing, those kinds of motivations are never going to change. That's not what I mean. I'm saying that these days it feels more like if you're going to make a video game thing, that you can actually make a video game thing as opposed to trying to, take a premise and then turn it into something like Dragon Ball Evolution. So Sonic 3 is a video game movie. It is straight up dumb much of the time. It is often overtly doofy. It's cringy without trying to be too self-aware about it, so it's pretty fun in that regard. It has a lot of references, most of which I didn't catch at all because I'm not that big of a Sonic guy. I just sort of caught that radiantly from other people. It definitely felt reverent of the material without needing to like Sonic that much to enjoy how silly the movie actually is. You could probably go into this movie without knowing anything about Sonic and not caring at all, and, you'd still have a good time. It has good pacing. Jim Carrey's performance is very typical of him and feels it feels most like his Grinch movie. Keanu Reeves' performance is not great, but at the same time, his voice sounds a bit old, but somehow that's also fitting for Shadow. It sometimes has this sort of twang to it that makes it sound like it's been electronically filtered in some way, too. I'm not sure what's going on there. He was also talking out of the side of his mouth a lot. Very odd. Wasn't that distracting? There are minimal humans this time. Thank goodness, I hate those awful things. So the movie doesn't drag for as long in those sections like the other 2 movies did. So to finish off this non-spoilery section, I would say that, in my opinion, this is probably easily the best of those 3 movies. Of Sonic 1, 2, and 3. 3 is the best one. Is it going to have substance? No, it's not. Well, it has a little bit of substance. So it's still worth seeing. I don't know what the general internet consensus on the movie even is, but that is my opinion. I know there's apparently some sort of controversy about a terrible YouTube video that someone made or something. I don't care. I don't care what you people watch. The vast majority of videos that I see that have millions of views these days are some of the worst pieces of trash I've ever seen. I don't know why you people keep watching these things. Anyway, before I start complaining about the YouTube algorithm again, here's now the spoilery section of the video, which is the rest of the video. So enjoy. I watched this movie with other people. There was a lot of interest in watching it, because usually whenever I recommend something or discuss the idea of seeing something, I get back a lot of, sure, I guess, I suppose we could watch that. Yeah, that's an alright movie. People were screaming to see Sonic the Hedgehog 3 for their own reasons. I don't quite understand it. I sort of get it. So there was so much excitement at the start that often I couldn't even hear anything that anyone was actually even saying. Whenever Shadow shows up, and I will be taking this sequentially, we're basically just going to be going through the scenes. Shadow's reveal sets a good tone for the film of being serious but sort of hammy without it being overtly intentional that they're doing so, if that makes any sense. Which again, if you're going to make a video game movie, that should be the tone. That you're taking it seriously, but then it has, these ridiculous video game style elements inside of it, but they are in universe, so you're still going to be drinking the sauce. The opening race hologram scene with Sonic was a little bit odd. I guess Tails isn't just a mechanic anymore, but he's also some sort of hyper genius, along with the Robotniks, they're also hyper geniuses. It's not a great opening scene. They use it again later on in the movie. It really just feels like something they were trying to like wedge all the characters in one at a time and then get to another scene, and they didn't quite bridge it narratively well enough. It feels awkward. But I don't feel like too many people in the Discord noticed, because they were still screaming about Shadow the Hedgehog by the time that we got to Sonic's birthday. Whenever you're writing a movie, the start is always very awkward, because you're not only trying to set tone, you're trying to establish all the information that you're going to be using throughout the rest of the story. So you're trying to pack in as much as you possibly can while making it simple. It is very difficult, so I always have sympathy for people that sort of start off on a weird foot. But obviously the important bits here for the first part of the narrative is Sonic caring about family and friends and the unity with his team, which they establish. Something I noticed as we jump back to the next Shadow scene. Throughout the first 1/4 of this film, Shadow is always wet. He's very, very wet. He's always soaked in something. It's so dramatic. He's so dark. Which, from what I gather, that's the whole point of Shadow. So he's very moody. He's the Vegeta. He's very moody, very dark and somber, and everything is always, oh, well, he's me as a teenager, effectively. That's exactly how I was. So Shadow's hostility towards everything does make sense. Sonic Team's weird relationship with Gun also makes sense. And their first fight, Sonic and Shadow, it doesn't feel too forced or too, just talk, that problem. Of people just not talking and that resolving the problem. So that element to why they are at odds in the first place, I appreciate. That takes us into a shot of Shadow the Hedgehog on a motorcycle with a child movie appropriate gun. That made everyone absolutely lose their shit because video games, which again, that's the point. The scene also served as a good bridge to Shadow being not enough of a team player at this point, like putting more priority on what he wants as opposed to what the team is doing as a whole. Which again, narratively is good. Once we get to the Chow Garden, that's a really odd work. I understand the need to fit chows in somewhere, but it being a Japanese novelty restaurant, a little bit strange. Why are they there? I don't know. They say it's the perfect place to blend in. Sure, whatever. They're there because chows. Something I'll point out, I did really enjoy Knuckles' you do look like a Pokemon. Haha, Pika Pika. I got a kick out of that. I like Knuckles' new fear of ghosts and cute creatures. He was also like mildly terrified of the chows for some reason. I've always enjoyed that juxtaposition of the strong guy being terrified of things that are silly and childish. We jump into Shadow's backstory, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you start thinking about him arriving on a comet or a meteor or something and he's in chains and him being imprisoned by humans. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I guess we're not really looking for lore here. It's just he's on Earth for whatever reason, and that's what's important. I get that, but again, mild criticisms. I also feel like Stone, the character of Stone, Robotnik's little henchman, gets used fairly well in this movie. I did not really care that he existed in 1 and 2. I felt like he was a little bit better. In 3, he's not really in it that much. But even though it's a very light foil rule, I feel like they used it correctly. I also like how long he goes while just wearing a tie with no shirt because it gets torn off. Apparently, as we jump into Robotnik being fat, apparently there's a lot of Shadow loves Latinas memes that stem from this amazing telenovela that they're showing on screen. I wish that we had gotten more out of whatever the hell that was going on. Because honestly, most of the time, especially during the human scenes, I definitely would have been rather watching that instead. And by the way, I can't really tell how fat Robotnik is meant to be most of the time. Because he fluctuates from being really fat to just Jim Carrey a few times, especially whenever he's in and out of his different costumes. He seems to either be very slim, or sometimes he seems to have a giant belly. I can't really tell. Now, as we go further back into the flashback stuff, Maria and Shadow's relationship actually did feel pretty authentic. I figured at first it would feel a bit like a Sonic 06 with him falling in love with the redhead woman, whatever that was. It's fucking weird. I had the sense that it was going to be sort of like that. Not in the sense of falling in love, but just the inauthenticity of this weird cartoon connecting with a little girl, that sort of thing. But actually, no, I was actually surprised. It actually did feel like heartfelt. I appreciated that. It reminds me, again, of little teenage me being assaulted by extroverts who like to challenge. I know in theaters, apparently, there was a lot of cheering whenever Maria dies because video games. I feel like a lot of people are like, oh my god, why are they cheering for this poor girl? That's the joke. Like, I'm not that into Sonic in the first place, but I do know the whole idea of the cartoon Sonic the Hedgehog, little doofy hedgehog thing, being torn up about Maria, this little girl, perishing is some sort of weird meme that I don't quite understand, but that is where it's coming from. But again, in context of the narrative, Shadow's motivations now make a lot of sense. And on the flip side, as we see later, Grandpa Gerald Robotnik, I guess we'll call him Eggman, the older one, less so makes sense, but I guess I'll get more into that later. Now, we jump back to the Sonic team. I really like Idris Elba's weird, flat screaming that he does as Knuckles. It's very odd, but it's appropriately funny. It felt like it may have taken a while in direction in booth to find the right kind of screaming that they were going for. It doesn't sound like a first take. It feels like they were telling him, no, you can't actually scream as Idris Elba. You have to actually, like, it has to be funny that you're screaming this way, so let's keep it flat. That's what it feels like to me. And this is happening during the trauma dump section of the story, where Robotnik is talking about his inability to connect with people and so on. So Robotnik's undesirable to all possible genders, which I found very funny. His backstory also makes him a bit more relatable and understandable. The whole film, so far, if you can't tell, is about estrangement from the people that are around us and our inability to find connections, that sort of thing. Which I really like because, wow, don't we need that message these days? Good lord. We also use the scene to try to explain away why the Robotniks can have access to all this technology by linking it back to an agreement that they had with Gunn. So that part is fine. It's not really rational, but obviously it's not terribly important in this video game movie that we're not supposed to be taking, too seriously. Which again, that's a good thing. Now, still in the scene, the chemistry between Carrie and himself is pretty good, which I guess it should be. I could see it going really wrong. Both of the characters feel very distinct in Carrie's performance, but also still similar. So I think he did a fairly good job with it. Robotnik more so, because the Eggman character, his grandfather, is not that present of a villain, but we'll get more into that once we hit the end, I guess. So, good lead up with Robotnik wanting an emotional connection, and Eggman not really caring, but still sort of going through the motions of doing so. The absolutely ridiculous VR bonding scene is one of my favorites in the movie, especially whenever Carrie sees Santa Claus, and then rears back and screeches like a goblin, tears across the room, and jumps on him through a tree. Whenever I see scenes like that, I just imagine like Japanese audiences watching this, because, Sonic, and just wondering, what the hell is wrong with Americans? Unfortunately, right after this, we have to go into, I guess I'll call it the heist scene of the movie, which is the wedding scene of, I think it was 2. So it's a very long stretch of humans, which I think in the prior films they were doing to save money, whereas now I feel like they have enough funding where they don't really have to worry too much about it. And I know in 4, they said that they have built up enough, which I'm going to assume means they built up enough executive anti-meddling, that now they feel like they can have an entire movie that is almost exclusively the Sonic characters. People don't like the humans. Get those nasty old humans out of here. The difference with this scene, though, is that it interweaves a lot of Robotnik with, occasional Sonic scenes to try to pace out the rhythm of doing all this. So, to me, it's a lot better than what was in the prior 2 movies. One of those Robotnik scenes was the laser hallway scene, where the lasers just don't work on them. That scene, I know, had a lot of traction on social media. It was being posted without any context. So whenever we got to it on our watch together, there were a lot of very confused people, but they were still entertained. It was very awkward and I sensed a few people got uncomfortable, which is exactly what I want to see. You should feel a little bit bad, but not be able to look away. The gravity room that it leads to, that's a fun, sort of mildly creative scene for the MacGuffin that they're after. It's fine. I usually don't have much to say about action, other than it kind of works, and I don't really care too much about action. I guess I will say that if you're trying to design an action scene, it can't just resort down to everything moving really fast and everything being so fast that you can't keep track of anything. So having a scene in which people are like frozen to the floor effectively is a good way to sort of control that and rein in the action scene so that it doesn't mesh with the other action scenes that we're going to be getting later that do have that speed. You know, variety. So during this, the whole emotional arc of Shadow becoming what he hates, and Sonic also becoming what he hates in a way, and Stone losing Robotnik and etc., it all is happening at the same time, very fittingly, during the big action scene and so on. This is the very middle point of the movie, I think. And again, importantly for the characters, it actually makes sense why they're doing these things. Too often in movies, people have wildly out of proportion reactions to things that happen. And this, even though it's this little kid's video game movie, it does make sense. Like Shadow doing what he does, why he might be hesitating at this point, why Sonic is not becoming evil or anything, but why he's getting angrier and less controlled because he's young and so on. Like, everything actually makes sense and it is fitting. But it isn't so in-depth that you have to like analyze it or anything. Again, great way of handling it. What I did not like was the hockey guy and Knuckles handing over the emerald to whoever. I think he was no, he wasn't the sheriff. He was like a deputy from the first film. It was a really stupid thing to do. And I would like to move away from Knuckles being stupid, because really it's just he doesn't know how Earth works, and he's kind of awkward and socially maladapted and so on from being alone for so long. So that's getting too far into Sonic Boom territory of, there's no way he would think that this is a mighty warrior. That, and it was too obvious. Once he said that, I was like, oh, they're going to cut back and it's going to be something stupid, like he has it under his bed, or, oh, it's being protected by a mighty warrior. Okay, it's going to be someone stupid, and it's going to be someone that we haven't seen yet. And I was trying to remember who it was, and then I saw him. It's like, oh yeah, that guy. So very obvious joke, didn't land at all. No one laughed at it. It's probably one of the weakest bits of the movie. Also kind of undercuts the whole point of them having protected the emerald in the first place when it turns out they're really bad at their jobs. Anyways, now we jump up into space, which gets us to the big Robotnik space station. I love the design of this thing. It's pretty crazy looking. I also love how every single time that one of the Robotniks makes something, they always find a way to fit in that face. And it's around now whenever we actually get a proper flashback to Maria's, being killed by the soldiers or whatever happened. They don't directly shoot her. I think in the video game they just directly shoot her, whereas in this one, it's like a nearby explosion, and then the soldiers kind of just vanish afterwards. I kept getting the sensation that Shadow's memories had been tampered with, like maybe Eggman had tampered with his memories in some way to make him appear more like a confidant, as opposed to what really happened. But no, he was actually there. So since we're on this point, Eggman's presence and motivations to me felt unearned due to some tonal dissonance there. I don't feel like the scenes carried that enough. Robotnik, like Ivo, and Maria apparently are cousins, but their parents, of course, are never shown. It's not important. Eggman doesn't seem to care about Ivo at all, but he does Maria. Now, it's understandable that a grandfather, grandparent, whatever, may hate the world from losing a favored child, but we don't really get to see his side of things. Which I guess, one, you don't want to empathize with the person that you're going to get rid of at the end of the movie. So I suppose this is less of a criticism and more of just a reality that you're going to have some tonal dissonance whenever you're establishing that his motivation is actually revenge. But it's just not going to have that same gravity to it because you're trying to distance yourself from having any sort of emotional, connection to your main villain. But, still, it's definitely a weak point of the film. Especially since the story is about not connecting with those around you, and him throwing away Ivo is a big part of that. So that's the main thing that I'm concerned about. You have the story about family and teamwork and the inability to find connections, and then you have a main villain who the entire crux of is that he wants to exterminate all of humanity because he can't form connections, and the one that he did have and he preferred is one that he lost, but he does have that same connection with another person, but he's completely disposing of it. All I'm saying is that's a really big point of the film, and you're not really doing any effort to explore it at all. Anyways, then they fight! Shadow and Sonic have their big super fight. It was fun. It was very fun. It felt kind of hackneyed in the way that Shadow kind of one-shot Sonic with the rings, just so that they can both have the power, so that they could have the fight. Whatever, who cares? Again, video games. It felt, as far as the way that it was shot, it felt very Dragon Ball Broly, because they did that same sort of first-person perspective. It was mainly the shot where he was basically punching him across different locations on the planet very rapidly. I thought that was very memorable looking, and they did a good job with it. Good job. So, again, I'm not an action person. I can't talk about it too much. I don't care. One thing that people kept reiterating, and I kept thinking, but assuring myself, who cares, is how are they breathing and talking in space? Who cares, I guess. Who cares? So, once they actually get to the moon, which I found funny, it gave me Spider-Man flashbacks, Shadow demanding that Sonic take his revenge was a little bit odd, considering Shadow's motivations. I guess it's projection on Shadow's part, or regret, but we don't get that side of the narrative. So again, a minor problem, where Shadow is demanding, do now, kill me, but he wanted to exterminate humanity. And sure, we got that one tiny bit of him realizing, oh, I did to his father what, happened to Maria, but that's not really enough to bridge why he would suddenly do a face turn. So Shadow turning doesn't really feel totally earned considering his trauma and what he was trying to do minutes prior to that, but we are talking about cartoon hedgehogs. It's not going to be a perfect experience, we're not talking The Godfather here, although the fact that I'm able to even offer up these criticisms does go to show that you are thinking about the movie on some level while you're watching it. So in a weird way, that is some form of praise. Also a form of praise, whenever Eggman, Gerald Robotnik, dies, I had to rewind that about 10 times because everyone could not stop laughing at it. It was so stupid. Just the fact that he gets poked in the butt, farts, flies away, and there's something about the way it's shot, the way that his face kind of just zooms into the camera lens, and then there's a big flat shot of him just hitting the electric wall, and there's that silent bug zapper as the music completely cuts out. And there's nothing bombastic about it at all. It's not like a big moment. I think Tails even goes, yeah! He doesn't say he's dead, but it's just like, yeah! They handled that murder really well. Good for them. Okay, so, again, I'm not an action guy. I tend to zone out whenever action stuff is happening. The resulting action, them falling through the atmosphere, trying to grab the ring and everything, it's fine. What I did focus on was the laser almost destroying the Earth, which I'm just going to resist the urge to talk about the logic of that, but whatever. But Robotnik declaring, I did it, me, I did it, followed by him sawing the moon in half and then looking to Knuckles and asking, look what you did! I like that. I like the indignation on that cartoon echidna. I have 4 penises. Okay, Ivo sacrificing himself immediately thereafter actually felt poignant in a weird way. And it wasn't just, a scene that is meant to happen. It actually felt like it was well directed and acted, and you felt some form of connection between the two of them. It wasn't one of the top 10 best moments in all of film history or anything, but it was fairly effective. It was surprisingly effective for this little children's movie. My expectations were very low, and you exceeded my low expectations. Congratulations, gentlemen. I will say here for the character, especially if you feel like Robotnik, what he was talking about earlier, in his trauma dump scene, I imagine it's much easier to project all of your feelings onto him whenever he's talking about this. Because again, the film doesn't hammer it in, but he was trying to connect with family, and he found someone that was effectively just like him, and was betrayed by this person. And he ended up having to kill him, and realized the only person that he had ever really had any sort of attachment with was a one-sided attachment from his only worker. Now, of course, again, it's probably inappropriate for a kid's film to get that heavy into something like that, but that's a very heavy concept if you start thinking about it. It's something that I feel like kids' films need to do, where it has to be appealing for all ages, and part of that is being able to communicate something very quickly that is a more of a abstract or deeper concept that has more weight to it, that is going to rely primarily on the viewer to be able to project that onto the screen themselves. That way the kids aren't bothered by it, it's not distracting, it doesn't ruin the tone or any of the fun or anything like that, but it's still there if you bring it with you. Yoda's still teaching us, wow. So I can see why adults, because I've heard this, would get choked up from all the emotional payoffs that happen during the film, because they all, again, feel pretty authentic. They're not just, garbage children's film stuff. They feel like they're actually coming from a place that the writer was thinking about. That is something I generally would like to say about the movie, is that it does feel like the people that were making it genuinely care about the property. And I feel that in degrees about each of the movies. Like 1 and 2, I felt that in places, but I also felt that sort of more distancing of we need to fit in Olive Garden and other marketing, horse hockey and here and there. I think that's a big part of why I feel like 3 is the best of the 3 films. It's not exclusively because of this, but because of the fact that it feels so much more authentic and like you can actually feel that people cared about what they were making. And a big part of why you should probably see the movie is because of that. Now, as far as the post-credits stuff goes, there were 2 post-credit scenes, if you didn't know. First is one that was making the rounds on social media. I feel like maybe they may have undermined Metal Sonic way too early, from having so many of them just copy-pasted all over the place, combined with how easily they were all handled. But that's a problem for Sonic 4, I guess. Amy looked good. Obviously, this drawing is a reference to that. You might argue that there was no non-spoiler section of the video because of the fact that I drew her, but I tried not to give any context to it. You see what I was trying to do. They tried, but they couldn't avoid female Sonic characters forever. We're eating good now, boys, he said to other artists. This drawing was from a very early cam grab, which is why the colors are so oversaturated. I couldn't really tell exactly what colors they were meant to be going for. I assume that, like, the gloves were white, but there was a little bit of blue in them. So whenever the whenever you adjust the colors for it, it upped that way too much. So I thought, well, maybe they could go for blue. It does match the pink. So I kind of just stuck with it. I considered going back to the file and readjusting the colors for afterwards, but I decided, whatever, who cares. Also threw Rouge back there because I know a lot of people were asking for Rouge, and she cannot be denied. I'm sure that she's going to be demanding attention at some point. As far as like a Sonic 4 goes, obviously 1, 2, and 3 were focusing on Sonic, then Sonic and Tails, and Knuckles, and then Shadow in the third one. I don't feel like Amy is going to be carrying that forward for 4. It would be more of a 2 situation where you want to introduce Tails and Knuckles. So I imagine that Amy is going to be present. There's probably going to be someone else as well. I don't know who it is, but it doesn't feel right that it just be her and no one else. Although if you start introducing too many characters, it could get so spread out that narratively there's just not enough focus. So I can see why they might want to keep the cast as low as possible. Although I feel like at this point they might want to move off Earth and go somewhere else and establish more like a base. How they usually in the comics and also in the old TV show, the more edgy one, not the comedy one, there was like a resistance. So you might want to have that where it's something for a lot of the characters to do that doesn't necessarily have to be the focal point. Anyways, I'm also glad that the post credit scene does let you know that Shadow is okay, although of course it can just be assumed that he is. Whatever. So again, great movie, great viewing experience over the Discord, whenever we all gathered together to watch stupid nonsense. Very silly. It has exactly the tone that it should have for a movie like this. And of course, I was mentioning Sonic 4. Sonic 4 was announced instantly, which tells me that internally they already knew that 3 was screening very well. It had a lot of backing from fans and so on, and that it would probably be a hit as well. Nothing about that's really surprising. I'm also glad that Jim Carrey came back for this. Came back for all of them. It's kind of odd that now he's probably going to be remembered primarily as Robotnik, after years and years of being the Ace Ventura guy, who sometimes did some more dramatic roles. Ever so often you will see like an older actor come back and like reinvent themselves, but it's usually just for one movie. It's kind of funny to see someone come back and sort of not whitewash, but pave over their old career with another layer of the same thing, but in a different context. I'm sure it's hard to have fun as an actor and sometimes, and it seems like he does enjoy making these, which I'm glad for. Maybe most importantly to me, I feel like this sort of weird thing that I watched of this Sonic property that I don't care too much about, but it's still kind of funny to me. This is the kind of movie that I feel like we need more of these days. Not specifically Sonic the Hedgehog 3, but a lot of IPs these days are still trying to do dark, dramatic, and edgy content, like we're still stuck in the late 1990s or 2000s. I don't know why. It feels like everyone's rejecting that, but people keep insisting on trying to make it. I think primarily like Star Trek. Recently, I think they released something, it's a film about Section 31, and it bombed tremendously because it has nothing to do with Star Trek, and if you don't care about Star Trek, it's still boring. And a lot of that is centered around the fact that they're trying to do this dark, edgy storytelling that no one cares about anymore. I also think of, here's another good example, the cartoon series James Gunn, Creature Commandos. I got exhausted of that. It was a very short series, like 8 or something episodes. I got exhausted of it because of the constant negativity and hyper-violence and the disregard for humanity as entertainment, which is a problem with DC in general. I feel like they tried too hard to reinvent themselves and recontextualize themselves against Marvel, which was being more, coincidentally, more hopeful and optimistic and more of a generalized superhero IP. So we're taking these properties that are meant to be hopeful, uplifting, and encouraging and telling everyone, no, the world can get better, and you're using those as a platform to tell this dire schlock that no one wants to watch. So this, I'm tapping the table, this is what I want to see more of. Something that is silly, uplifting, fun, accessible, has some adult elements in it, even though they're not overtly there. You know, entertainment, a movie. I feel like people forget sometimes that they're not supposed to be using these things as a platform for their political beliefs or a way to reprimand the world about how bad it is. You're supposed to be making people feel better and be better. Now, again, is Sonic the Hedgehog 3 the bastion of quality that is going to resonate forward throughout all history and change the world and so on? No. But this is basically what I'm after. This is what I want to see more of. Just stupid nonsense like this. Give me more. People want more. So you, go see it. It's worth it. It's probably better viewed together than being alone. Which again, pretty fitting considering the tone of the movie, if you can actually find people to watch it with. If you don't, come over to my Discord, we'll watch it again. What do I care? I love to rewatch things, even though some people do not. But anyways, until then, be critical, be kind. I will see you guys next time.